So this book, um, I got years and years ago, and I find it to be a very important book when it comes to this story and this history. Of course, the book is the Stargate Conspiracy, the truth about extraterrestrial life and the mysteries of ancient Egypt. But I feel like I've gone back to this book just hundreds of times, looking back at things for research purposes. And I think you both did a very amazing job looking into all of this.
Well,
But
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah,
That's appreciated. So
but to
it's been a
start,
long ride.
It was a rough ride.
yeah, I bet. I just wanted to ask, what led to your interest into writing this book in the first place?
Well, it's kind of it surprised us that we did because it wasn't really what we normally kind of write about. We kind of got pulled into it. This was back. Well, the book came out in 1999, and we wrote it specifically for the millennium. That was, the upcoming millennium then. Um, and to be honest, we didn't expect the book to still be around 25 years after that, but it is. It's still around, still in print, it's still selling. People are still reading it. So the message we were trying to get out for the millennium is obviously still relevant. Um, and how we got pulled into it, it was really because we were looking we were looking at ancient Egypt more from the point of view of its religion, as a follow-up to our previous book called The Temple of Revelation. And it coincided with this time. We're talking about the mid 1990s now. It coincided with a time when there was a lot of interest in the monuments of ancient Egypt. The pyramid and the Sphinx, and the message that it held for humankind, and what it meant with what it would mean at the millennium, as if it held this great secret. So we got kind of pulled into that. We were just sort of avid readers of all these books that were coming out and watching the documentaries and the VHS videos as they were then. And we just kind of started to spot a kind of a pattern behind them, that it wasn't just all people making these discoveries that seemed to dovetail, but they're all kind of being pulled together to reinforce one particular view of the ancient past and one particular system of belief. And then, because it then started getting pulled into, at the time it was the other big thing at the time was the monuments of Mars, the face on Mars, and people still remember them, and how they connected with ancient Egypt. And then more and more things started to get pulled in, like even down to alien abductions, things like this. And we just began to wonder, like, what was going on. And then as we looked into it, certain names kept turning up along the way, which were actually quite familiar to us from things that had been going on 20 years before, when we were, a part of the kind of alternative and what's the term for it? Paranormal scene.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the world of the
World
unexplained.
of the unexpected. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things that were appeared to be new to a lot of people were familiar to us from a long time before. And that's where we began to make these connections with the whole Council of Nine scenario with Andrea Puharich and all those things. And as we dug more and more into that, we saw, we first of all started to write a book to say, hang on, you need to look behind. This other material that was coming out. There's another level to this, another story. And then the nearer it got to the millennium, we actually saw it was all heading towards something that was going to happen at the millennium, that was designed to shake people up. So what began, a book then turned into a warning to kind of watch out what was going to happen with. So
Yeah, we were sidetracked because our original intention was to write a book about the ancient Egyptians' religion, but we got kind of hijacked. Our interest got hijacked by what was going on in then modern Egypt. So, and it was all very skullduggerous. Well, it was. I was going to say we thought, but it was. And we were aware that there was something big building involving a huge number of people in disparate groups, all being pulled together for something big that was going to happen around the millennium. So, I mean, we're writers. We couldn't let that one go,
And of course, then it went back. We realised it actually went back to stuff that happened over 50 years earlier with Puharich.
Yeah.
And it had been going on all that time, and it was just like this recurring story. That I mean, it's the most extraordinary and complicated one, as you've found. But one we just had to tell. Took a lot of piecing together, and even then there are a lot of blanks and loose ends of things. Some of which we've tied up since, but
No, I think it's one of the most comprehensive books about this stuff, and I know how much there is to get into, and I'd love to do that. But it'd take a long time. So, in the interest of this, I want to stick to, like I said, stuff about Puharich and the Nine and so forth. But I'm curious, when did Puharich as a character sort of come into the picture in your research specifically?
Well, strangely enough, by the time I was working with Clive on Stargate Conspiracy, it was a name that was already known to me, because in the late 70s and early 80s, I was deputy editor of what was then a cult classic called The Unexplained in the UK. It was a weekly publication. And we got lots of letters, as you could imagine. And I got a letter from a woman in the States who was in a dreadful state. And she told this story in great detail. And I lost the letter. I'm sorry. I wish I had it, but I don't. We'll call this lady Susan. Don't know. Can't remember her name. But anyway, I remember the story. And she said that all her life, she'd been a bit psychic. She'd be able to predict things, and she was very sensitive to atmospheres and so on. And then she lived in a small town in the Midwest. And then one day somebody said, "Oh, there's this guy coming through. He's doing research, and he really wanted to meet you. And his name's Andrea Puharich." So she went and met him, and he was all over her saying, "You're so talented, you're amazing. I'd like to do some research. Do you mind if I hypnotize you?" And she said, "No, it sounds really exciting." And he built it up, So for about a week, intensively every day, for hours and hours, he hypnotized her. At that time, he was going through his phase of being heavily into hawk-headed visions of hawk-headed gods, or dreams of hawk-headed gods, or anyway, the bird, and I mean, from reading between the lines, and indeed reading the lines of this letter, she made it clear that Puharich's questions when she was under hypnosis were incredibly loaded. I mean, basically, unethically loaded. I mean, he's saying, "Are you seeing hawk-headed gods?" kind of thing, And of course she said yes. And she was seeing these quite scary, really up close in her mind. Then after about a week, he said, "Well, I'm moving on now. Here's, my phone number," kind of thing. And off he went. And then really bad things started to happen to her, in the sense that she was followed around by these hawk-headed beings. She couldn't shake it at all, and she had nightmares. But that wasn't the worst of it. It was like she had a poltergeist following her around, in the car, knocking on the, raps on the roof of the car, things going on at home. Her family was completely spooked. And things happened, like, I remember the thing that stuck in my mind. She went with her family to a diner and they were having lunch. And suddenly, at the same moment, everybody's ice cream dish split down the middle. It sounds funny, but I mean, imagine that. It's, and I mean, she, her family to a large extent, and certainly her neighbors and people who knew her and her co-workers were all calling her a witch, And anyway, the short story was, of course, she was thinking, well, if I can get hold of Puharich, he will basically lift the spell. I mean, he'll put me back to where I was before. And she phoned the number, and he never picked up. He never got back to her. And she said, she ended the letter by saying, "And I don't know what to do. I've lost my job. I've lost my family. I'm living in my car." That was the story.
Yeah.
So I mean, I had heard of him, of course, by the time we got round to this, but obviously it wasn't a good rep he'd got.
He was a name that was known in the 70s, mainly because he's the person who kind of, quotes, discovered Uri Geller. So anyone that was into the unexplained, as we both were. I was a reader of the unexplained at the time. Lynn was working on it. It was a familiar name, which is why we knew him. And that's what, you did Unexplained, did some articles about him and by him, didn't they?
Yes. Yeah, that's strangely enough, that's the obvious thing to remember, and I don't remember that much, but yes.
That's why they wrote basically, watch this guy. So we knew where to start looking when that, and we knew that there was something, the presentation of him in most of the literature with Uri Geller is he's just this parapsychologist.
Yes,
that you knew better.
Yes.
You knew that there was
a darker side.
Yeah. So that's when we started looking back into him, and just beginning with his discovery of Uri Geller. And then in his book about Uri Geller, he talks about the whole nine thing that began back in the early 1950s. And we looked at that, and it was kind of vaguely familiar because it was quite a big thing in the 70s. But as we looked into it then to see what was behind that, and with a slightly more suspicious eye because of that, we started to see all these connections between him and the US military, the intelligence agencies, and realizing that the way the Nine story had been told missed out that important element that connected it to all these really, behind the scenes conspiratorial things. We always kind of call it the thing, you couldn't make it up, because we started on this research and it seemed like all the classic things on your conspiracy theory checklist, they all came up. We didn't go looking for them. They were just there. And it's like, the first one being, that Puharich is connected to the MK Ultra experiments that the CIA did. So it's like, tick that one, and it kind of went on from there. And we kept looking at each other saying, no, it sounds like we're making this up, but it's just, that's where we led.
Yeah, I mean, our publisher said, you're really pushing the envelope with this one.
Yeah. I could imagine, because now I feel there's so much out there. I mean, a lot which probably came from your book and your research, but I would think that back then when you were sort of discovering all this, it was exciting and new. I mean, because as far as I know, there was not much out there about these connections and so forth before the 90s period and the book and all that.
Well, I have to say that Clive is brilliant at joining the dots of anything. I mean, he's talk about lateral thinking. He's really, absolutely brilliant researcher in that respect. So, we didn't set out with the idea of having all these dots joined. They just joined as we were going along because they automatically did.
Same people recur in the story in very unexpected ways, and there were. By the time it got to the 90s, there were some other researchers that we reference in the book who had began to sort of dig into this, not so much the Council of Nine, but Puharich's other activities. And it's where we, when we found that and put all that together, and that's where the story just got weirder and weirder. But there's been a lot of new information come out. It's over 25 years since our book came out. And there was a lot of things that were not really that well known or just rumoured at the time, but classified documents that have been released in the meantime have expanded the story and shed new light on it. So it continues to get even more intriguing, I have to say.
Yeah. I want to go back. I mean, I'm just assuming a lot of people who would be watching know about enough about the early Nine and the Round Table Foundation, of course, Puharich's lab in Maine. But something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about is this idea that you get into in the book, which is, the earliest channelings of the Nine with Dr. Vinod at the round table. It's a strange time because Puharich, of course, does seem like a genuine um, researcher of the paranormal, and but at the same time, there's these connections, and we know that he was funded by the army back then and other agencies. So there's this weird, tightrope thing. I feel like he was walking even very very early on back then, and so you get into the book this idea that from early on, the Nine was this sort of experiment or psyop or mind control thing, that there was something else going on behind that, and there's a lot of red flags, of course, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on your theory there when it comes to those early first channelings from the 50s.
Well, it's looking back on it with the light of what happened later, because the way that story was always told, and kind of relying on, you have to rely on Puharich's own writing to begin with. And he didn't tell that story until he wrote his book about Uri Geller in the mid 1970s. When he told this backstory that the first contact with the Nine was through Dr. Vinod at the Round Table Foundation. And you read it as if it's something that happened during a parapsychology experiment. And kind of that's it, because the Round Table Foundation researched all kinds of matters to do with parapsychology. They had mediums in there, some very, very famous mediums and psychics that they studied in this, private research place. But then you actually, as you look into it, and even in Puharich's own references to that era, he talks about visits to the place by high-ranking army officers. And the interesting thing is that they're always from the US Army's psychological warfare department, which was something that only the Pentagon had only recently got into, the idea of psyops and psychological warfare. But everything that happened within the foundation was very much self-contained. And the foundation lasted basically throughout the 1950s, and then it was closed down, and then Puharich moved on to other things for the next decade. And that part of the story doesn't pick up until Uri Geller arrives on the scene in the early 1970s, and that's when Puharich starts. Geller is in touch with representatives of the Nine after being hypnotized by Puharich, and that's when Puharich tells the story of Dr. Vinod. But if you look back onto the 1950s, that's a very self-contained thing, as if that's experimenting with things just to find out what could and couldn't be done with them. It's gathering data. It's not designed for any particular thing other than just find out what's going on. When it comes to the 1970s, it seems much more that it's even more of an experiment to see what could be done with the story when you made it public, and you then say, could we use this for manipulation? Originally, it was just what can happen within the walls of the foundation. Sorry, just to shimmy, I have to say, I'm just getting over a cold, so if I
okay.
If my thoughts keep going.
Well, the one thing that is never terribly clear, I mean, it's obvious. Well, it's obvious to us that Puharich was trying to use paranormal or allegedly paranormal events, channeling for manipulation or experimentation in power politics, really, in a sense. But how much did he actually believe that there was genuine paranormal elements in what he was studying? And that's not, terribly clear. And most people, I suppose, would say, well, presumably he didn't believe any of it. It was just seeing how you could manipulate, the seance room, basically, and its influence outside of the seance room. But we think that there's a possibility that he did believe up to a point, and that there was something genuinely paranormal going on. And it was like 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, He wanted almost, I don't mean in some Faustian actual way, but it was almost like he wanted to do a deal with whatever unknown power was there, just to push it and see how it could be used, But I mean, we'll never know. We'll never know unless there's something, in his archives that we certainly don't know about, where he comes out and says, "Well, I didn't believe this, or I did believe that,"
Yeah.
But as far as we can tell, it's impossible to see whether he believed any of it. But we think they probably did believe that there was something genuine going on, but he wanted to be part of that, and he wanted to control it, or he wanted to see if you could control it. And a lot of people have been there before him in various guises over the centuries, and they could tell him, no, you can't. But anyway, anyway, yes. So it's fascinating. This kind of, I mean, he's not Dr. Faustus, he's not doing a deal with the devil, but it's that kind of desire for knowledge that's off the scale, and he'll do anything. And but also later on. I don't know about the Dr. Vinod thing, but later on, when Phyllis Schlemmer is the transceiver, the medium of choice, with the Council of Nine, there are a couple of hints that it's very, very similar to the classic old mediums and other channelings. Very similar MO on part of something. But I mean, even something simple like the dismissive, that the entities allegedly, they call her this being in a very dismissive kind of way, and that's over and over again in other scenarios, way before her. In seance room scenarios, you get this very similar, in fact, very, very similar attitude between the alleged entity and the medium, and so it does make you think, well, maybe there's something, I mean, not actually sticking our necks out and saying, oh yes, well, we believe in the cliche of the low-level spirits or whatever, but it is very similar also to, dare I say, to the old fairy stories, of Europe, where people get beguiled by these entities who promise them the earth, and and then it's all taken away. So there probably might have been something genuinely paranormal involved, and Puharich presumably thought there might be. I mean, obviously have to hedge that around with lots of ifs and buts and mights, but he was using it. I mean, over and above there being something real there, his purpose was to use it as a control freak, essentially, but in an experimental way, to see how far he could push it.
Yeah, to see how it could be used.
Yeah,
because it's an important point that hit us as we put this together. That because the Round Table Foundation was quite privately funded, but some of the funding was coming from the military. But throughout, and they were experimenting with all kinds of different aspects of ESP and telepathy and everything. But when we looked at why the military was involved, it wasn't about using these things for intelligence gathering, which became that thing in the 1970s, psychic spying. It was the psychological warfare. And then we're thinking psychological warfare, that is about manipulating people's perception and belief. And that seems to be the thing that you're trying to use, that including the VNOD context, to see how you could use that to manipulate. Yeah. But I mean, extraordinary place the Round Table Foundation is. We found out it's even more extraordinary than we even realised back when we were writing the book. But,
Hmm. Yeah, no, you kind of answered my next question as far as yeah, like why, what would the purpose be if this were like a psychological um operation? And you give some interesting examples in the book about that as well. Um, one thing just to wrap up the roundtable time, you know, there's a lot of talk about who was there, you know, during some of these sessions back then, as far as, of course, military people, but there was very, you know, high up individuals from, you know, high society in the United States and so forth. Can you comment a bit on that, about what you remember of who was present and why that would have been important, or why were some of these people there, do you think?
yeah. Well, that was the other fascinating thing, is that, you know, right from the beginning, and, you know, and all the way through this story, it's this mix of working with the psychics, but always surrounded by people from very, very wealthy families. I mean, at the Round Table Foundation, yeah, one of the women who were both funding it and participating in all these experiments. We got Alice Bouverie, who was one of the Astor family. Her father was the Astor that died on the Titanic. You have one of the, well, you have Ruth Young, who's one of the Forbes family. You know, and you don't get much wealthier than that. Excuse me. There's one of the DuPonts. So you've got this incredibly wealthy network around there. And some of these actually sat when Renaud made his first appearance. Sorry, when the Nine made their first appearance through Council, through the, sorry, the Nine made their first appearance through Renaud. And so Puharich put together a circle of 9 sitters that would meet regularly to hear him channeling them. You know, Alice Bouverie and Ruth Young were part of that. So was Arthur Young, who her husband, who became, you know, a very big name in kind of you know, metaphysical mind, body, spirit stuff in the 60s. But also there was you know, a former vice president of the United States, Henry Wallace, who was vice president under Roosevelt, who was funding the foundation. And it was almost certainly, we're not absolutely sure, but almost certainly one of those 9. So right from the beginning, it's the whole thing is built around high-level contacts within, you know, wealthy families, upper levels of politics, and people in the military. That's, I mean, if you're looking for a conspiracy, you can't get any better than that.
But the thing is about, you know, the really wealthy people is that they are very sensitive about wasting time. Time is money, you know. So obviously, what they went for in these sessions, and then went back and went back and went back, had to be worth their time. Now, we don't know exactly what it was, but it, one way or another, it had to give them something, a hook. It had to hook them. It had to hook them as a group, but even more importantly, it had to hook them individually. So it had to offer them something that they couldn't get anywhere else. And you know, the annoying thing is we don't know what it was, but it had to be, you know, a very carefully tailored to keep those people on side, because, you know, they were rich, they were useful, they were influential, and, you know, the big word, they were powerful. So they had to be kept on side. And wouldn't it be wonderful to know, you know, the detail of what they were given as a hook? Yeah. But obviously they were given hooks from the very beginning. So, you know, time is money, don't waste your time. And obviously they felt their time wasn't being wasted.
That's an interesting point. So moving from that time, and this is something I've looked into a lot myself, and I just wanted to get your comments on this, the moving into the intellectron era of his life, which of course was this company that did sort of biomedical electronics research that he was, I guess, president of during the 60s. But there's this whole Bobby Horn story, which is really, I mean, if true, kind of a shocking story. And, I've gone to great lengths to try to track this person down. I know that's like a pseudonym, I think, and that he used. I don't think that was his real name, but it's just a very bizarre story. And I've tried to look into that more and have not really been able to find much. But what are your thoughts on that particular story in this
Yeah.
timeline?
So we took the Bobby Horn story.
Yeah.
Yeah. That yeah. That was I've got to say that was a weird one. That was a weird one, even within a weird story.
Mm.
I mean, Puharich during the 60s did become an inventor, particularly of medical devices, electronic devices. But his thing seems to be to use all different methods to plant ideas in people's heads, I have to say. He was a master hypnotist, so he used hypnosis. As soon as he met a potential psychic, well, pretty much the first thing he'd do was hypnotize them. And it does also appear to have been using like psychic means. But he also used electronics. And the strangest one, he patented a few different devices in the 60s. But the same one, he invented a tiny radio that could be implanted in the false tooth. And then when the Nine made their sort of comeback in the 70s, initially through Uri Geller, who they said he was their chosen one. He was going to be, the big one.
The only one.
The only one for the next 50 years.
Mm.
Yeah. But then after a year or two, he actually bowed out because he'd become a superstar. So off he went. Very unusual for someone to, in a way, walk out on Puharich. They looked for someone to replace him, and they found this guy. He's only known under they called him Bobby Horn. They've never revealed his real name because he was, I think, it was a chef or something,
That's right.
a cook. But he, showed ability as a psychic, so they brought him in. Puharich immediately hypnotized him, and the Nine began to speak through him now. So he became like their favored channel. But the Nine said through him, and of course he would be in hypnotic trance. It's like Uri Geller always said, he was always in hypnotic trance, so he was the only one in the room who didn't know what was going on. But in trance, the Nine said through Bobby Horn, when he channels us, he can't have any metal on him, and that includes the metal fillings in his teeth. And one day, Bobby Horn woke up and found that in the night, all his metal fillings had amazingly and miraculously been replaced by compound ones. Now, which, that's supposed to be, oh wow, an amazingly paranormal thing happened. But then when you start thinking, hang on, Puharich invented a radio that could go into false tooth. Seems a little bit suspicious there.
Yeah.
And also, he was regularly hypnotized by Puharich. So he said he went to bed one night and then woke up the next morning and all this had happened. But, presumably hypnosis was involved somewhere along the line. And it went badly for him because Bobby Horn, I think the reason they don't release his name is because his mental health suffered so badly from the pressure he was put under. He actually became suicidal in the end. So they had to let him go. And having let him go, you understand why under that kind of pressure somebody would get to that stage. But they were kind of quite, in later writings, quite sort of dismissive of him.
Yep.
Basically, he wasn't up to it.
Presumably, the idea is that under hypnosis, they would have implanted this, I guess, in his mouth. I mean, it's pretty, I guess that's possible, right?
It seems, I mean, just the story is so suspicious.
Mm.
And of course, that the thing of, having no metal on you and having your fillings replaced doesn't seem to have applied to any of the 9 channels that came before or after, just with him. And it is like Puharich wanted to try out his tooth radio.
By the way, I had a thought about Puharich and and Geller actually specifically, but and hypnosis, because over the years I've done a lot of work with hypnosis, and I know quite a bit about it. And it struck me as being very odd when Geller said, I was the only person in the room who couldn't remember what's happened because I'd been hypnotized. Because normally with hypnosis, you can remember, unless you're told you won't be able to, you can remember what goes on. So clearly Puharich had invested in basically the whole system of basically, telling his hypnotizees that you won't remember. So you'd have to go out of your way specifically to do that.
Yeah. And it was always the same pattern would recur each time Puharich would meet this new potential medium, this psychic. He would hypnotize them given the first opportunity. He would then get them to channel an entity, and it would always start off as some different entity. With Geller, it was something called spectra and so on. But then he would ask, well, the entity through the medium, through the psychic, are you connected to the Council of Nine?
Mm-hmm.
And then the answer would always be, well, yes, we fit into this cosmic hierarchy that the Council of Nine, we're working for them. And, with hypnosis, the big thing about hypnosis is it makes the person who's been hypnotized, what's the word?
Confabulate.
They want to help.
Yes. Yeah.
They want to please.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a word for it.
Yes. Yeah. But the thing is that absolutely rule one of being a hypnotist is you do not ask leading questions. I mean, it's almost pointless in a way, because you're just basically creating your own scenario from an incredibly cynical base. You're just basically going through the motions because you know what the answers are going to be. If you're asking, are you a member of, the Council of Nine or whatever it is, the cosmic hierarchy, the answer is going to be yes. So right, next question.
But then what becomes even more interesting that after that basic scenario starts, so he follows this standard script of hypnotizing this person and get them to channel the Nine. The channelings that then come through tend to actually match up with what's come through the previous mediums. This is the bit this is where it gets really puzzling, and you realise that something genuinely paranormal is happening. That once it's got them channeling this one back to this same source, they then tend to come up with things that back up. Others. And this is something that puzzled people that looked into it into the 70s, because it looks like it's just kind of a fantasy or a manipulation by Puharich, but then
the genuine
something.
But what that was artifact induction.
No,
I mean, one of the things that it seems that Puharich was experimenting with was what became known as artifact induction in parapsychological circles, which is you start off in some experiment or another, basically faking a phenomenon. and the other people in the group don't know that you faked it, and they go, oh, it's really happened, it's really happened, and then real stuff starts to happen. It's like you've shown the I don't know, the entities. You've shown the entities what you want them to do, and then they do it. I mean, that's the theory. And maybe that's one of the things that Puharich was investigating. I mean, he would certainly have known about the principle, being, his whole thing was parapsychology in general. So artifact induction was a big thing. So yeah, I mean, that's so some of it was fake to start off with, and then he was perhaps waiting to see what would happen then as a result of deliberately kicking the session off with a fake.
And that's when it just starts to get really weird. That's when you get into Stranger Things territory.
Yeah.
It's like you don't know who's manipulating who by then.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess the something that I've again looked into a lot and that you bring up in the book is like this idea of a sort of like a drawn out experiment with this whole thing, and looking into sort of cult creation and then this kind of aspect, and that would make sense, of course, but that's just the puzzle that never seems to get solved with Puharich. Is like he and again, I've done so much 10 years or so of research on him, and just he clearly was interested in this paranormal phenomenon, but we also know of his connections to intelligence and things. So it's just where is that line drawn? I mean, it's both. Is it more of one? Is it more of the other? It's very difficult to figure that out with him.
Yeah. Well, that's where it the whole thing becomes so baffling, and in the Stargate Conspiracy, we couldn't come to a final answer with here as who's manipulating who. Is it Puharich manipulating the psychics to do and say what he wants, or is he manipulating? He's getting them to be put in touch. Sorry, he's putting them in touch with some external entity, and is he then trying to manipulate the entity?
It won't work. It won't work.
It just gets round and round. But it's and Puharich, he also studied shamanism in the 1960s after the Round Table phase, particularly in Hawaii. And a lot of shamanic practice is, about being able to tell the difference between different kinds of entities, the helpful ones, the benevolent ones, and the trickster ones, or the outright the malevolent ones. And it's like, Puharich is trying to work with that and find out what the rules of that are.
But the problem with the trickster ones is that it's an endless quest, because I realize I sound completely bonkers now, but if you go along with the basic premise, so you have trickster shape changers essentially, or entity changers, and you won't know whether you're dealing with the trickster or the malevolent or the goodies, because they can be all of those things or any of those things at any given moment.
But maybe he's trying to find out if you can tell.
Yes.
Maybe it's not a test.
Yes.
It's just hard to know what's going on in his mind. And when he's doing that, is he doing it for himself, for his wealthy patrons, for the intelligence agencies, or is he just using them as a source of funding?
But I mean, there was some elements that seemed definitely experiments into belief, purely psychological, really. I mean, like the thing about, there's going to be mass landing of spacecraft, and guess what? There wasn't. And there were sort of these very lame excuses, but, you don't need this anymore because, but I mean, it's over and over again in the literature, you have similar things, even if it's something as simple as, you know, in a seance, for example, look out of the window now, you'll see the ghost of so and so. And you look out of the window, there's nothing there, of course, you know.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, but it's time's not right, or there's, you know, or there's. I mean, but how do you then get those people to carry on believing? But apparently with great ease, really, you know, because they want to. They're so excited by the whole thing that even with this massive disappointment, I mean, who doesn't want to see a fleet of spaceships arriving, you know, right on cue? But they're not there. But they still believe. And that, of course, is something that is very, very interesting to research as a psychological phenomenon. So you can see that how that kind of thing runs through all the experiments as a purely psychological test. Yeah.
So just on that, just to Lynn, talking of the prophecy that all these spaceships were going to arrive it was put out in the 1970s. That was at the time in the UK, that was actually quite a big thing, because there was a fairly high-profile book that Puharich and his team commissioned from a very well-known British writer. He wrote a kind of book about the nine, and with a mainstream UK publisher that actually attracted a lot of publicity at the time because of this promise all these spaceships were going to turn up soon, and it made the press, it made the media. So that's another reason why the name and the story of the nine was familiar to us, from the past. And of course, once the spaceships didn't arrive, the story died, and as is the way of these things, pretty much everyone forgot about it. It's only us in the 90s thinking, hang on, weren't these the people who 20 years ago were sort of stirring all this stuff up in the British media?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's of course the Stuart Holroyd book.
Yes.
I actually spoke with him. He passed away, sadly, a couple years ago, I think. But I spoke with him, a very interesting guy. But that's the next thing I wanted to get into, and just a few more things. And this is the whole chapter with, John Whitmore and Phyllis Schlemmer. And I know in the book you bring up some sort of interesting theories about what was really going on in terms of course, the nine was allegedly telling the group that they needed to go to the Middle East and these other locations to, meditate, which would in effect sort of dampen the war and so forth going on in the mid 70s. But what do you think, given all the context that we've talked about, and of course you've researched, what might have really been happening, I guess, behind the scenes during that time, where they're traveling seemingly anywhere they want to go? Russia, I know they've been there, so it's just what do you think was kind of going on behind the scenes there?
I mean, if you're going to do, if you're going to look at it, they say it seems like a cover for, proper, normal intelligence op. They could, they're going around the Middle East at a time of, as I say, a time of particular tension, but in a way, when wasn't there one? And then going into Eastern Europe and going places behind the Iron Curtain. They end up in Poland when that was behind the Iron Curtain and during the Cold War, and start with radio equipment and start putting aerials up. And it's like, how crazy could you be? And, you're trying to attract attention that you're a spy. But I suppose if you say, well, we're here researching psychic, whatever it's one of those things. Again, it doesn't make any sense. They even tried to go into Moscow Puharich, Phyllis Schlemmer, and John Whitmore, they tried to get into Moscow without a visa, which is why they didn't get there. And you're just thinking, how crazy is that?
Yeah.
I mean, how comes they weren't locked up weren't arrested as potential spies? So what was really behind it? But also how it fits into the 9 scenario. That doesn't kind of work either. Um, and always emphasize that Puharich was always working with the CIA, people like that. Actually, just to tell another story, the things that happened since, right, with Stargate Conspiracy, sort of immediately after that book, we actually went off in another, even more of a tangent, and were writing books on 20th century military history with a guy that ran into Stephen Pryor, who unfortunately isn't around anymore, who was ex-British Security Service person. But these were like writing these history books. And it actually turned out that during his time with MI5, he'd actually worked with Andrea Puharich. It was, it completely came out of nowhere, this one, because Puharich is known during the 1970s phase when the Nine did their kind of second of their 3 act. That because Sir John Whitmore was British. They spent a lot of time in the UK, and during that time, Puharich was actually working on MI5 operations. It was Stephen didn't tell us the full details because he couldn't, but from little clues, it was actually to do with perhaps developing truth drugs. Again, mind manipulation.
But it did sound the little bit that we could piece together. It sounded highly unethical.
Yeah.
A highly unethical experiment. Yeah.
But that was another one of those kind of weird things that, we'd finished Stargate, we'd moved on to other projects. And we end up working with a guy who completely randomly, we mentioned the name Puharich one day and said, yeah, I'll work with him.
He said, nice guy.
Yeah.
Nice guys. Yeah.
And
on nothing, and it was nothing to do with the paranormal or
what book is this? I'm sorry, I don't.
Sorry.
Which book is this that you're referring to?
We were working on a book about Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess's flight to the UK in the middle of the Second World War.
Yeah.
We worked with this guy Stephen Pryor.
Yeah.
We did 2 other books with him as well, but he's now no longer with us. But
these are kind of, if you like, straight history, nothing paranormal or unexplained about it. It's just literally trying to solve historical mysteries relating to the Second World War. Yeah. But it's just...
the book is called Double Standards.
Okay.
The first book. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So yeah, I guess that's something that I couldn't help but think as well, as that would be sort of an interesting cover to say, well, we're just we were led here by this group of beings, and they would think you're crazy or something and just move right along. So
sorry, just to interrupt, because the other thing is, if they're working with, if it's something to do with channeling the Council of Nine, why do they need to set up a radio and an aerial?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I think that had to do as well with, as far as I understand, that the whole the tooth radio, or that concept, and sort of testing, the length of how far the transmission could reach, and that kind of thing. Pardon me. This 1977 television interruption that happened in the UK.
Yes.
I'm just curious. I wasn't aware that had mentioned Puharich and Whitmore. I'm curious where you got that information.
Right. Well, that is apparently wrong. It's because at the time we wrote the book, you couldn't get a recording of that thing at all, and the only record we had, there was a book, a 1950s UFO book about a contactee was republished, and it had a new for. It was about people's efforts to contact UFOs by radio, and the this new edition that came out as we're writing Stargate Conspiracy had a foreword by an American UFO researcher, contemporary with that period. And in his foreword to this book, he's the one that had this quote from it that mentioned Puharich, and I think Sir John Whitmore. But we had no reason to think, there was anything wrong with that. So, which is why we quote it in the book. Since then, also we were writing at a time when the internet wasn't what it is now. Google had only just started, and there's no Wikipedia yet. But now you can get recordings of that online and transcripts, and we've been through them, and there is nothing about Puharich or Whitmore. The reference isn't there. Just to give it the usual kind of weird twist, we do know that that made the news at the time. Yeah, that was a big splash about aliens talking through televisions. Excuse me. And there's a UK radio station did a story on it, and Sir John Whitmore was interviewed about it.
Yeah, I have that recording.
Yeah, there's no. Sorry,
I found that recording. Yeah,
the recording of the interview.
Yeah.
We tried to find that because the online archive that was supposed to have it had gone. So love to hear that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because the Nine would often say in channelings that they would attempt to communicate through transmissions like television and radio and so forth. And that was something they often said they were able to do.
But it's interesting that ties into, I mean, the Victorians, every new discovery and onwards into the 20th century, all the new discoveries, like Marconi and television, every time it was, this might help us contact the dead. Photography. This might help us. Sort of sound recording. This might help us. Contact the dead. There was always that element to it until it really got going, and then people forgot all that. But there was in the early days of the first flickers of what we would call technology. It was always that this will help us. And it's almost like that's still present in people's minds. That the hardware, might somehow help us communicate with the spirits and the gods.
Yeah.
But again, also that event could have been another experiment because it was only in a very, very small area of the UK. And it obviously needed the technology and the know-how to do it. That it was just to see at that time, back in the 70s, can we take over a television broadcast and put a message in it as if it's from them, the aliens, and to test it in case you can then put it out on a wider scale? Because, let's face it, if it had been genuine extraterrestrials, they would have the technology to have taken over the entire world's broadcasting at the same time, not just this little part of rural England, which is what they did. But again, maybe an experiment. Puharich was in the country at the time. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I know that as well. As far as his journals, there's actually entries that show he was there. That during that exact week, I think it was the November.
But it's interesting that the story, it should be reported that this message mentioned Puharich when actually it seems it didn't. But the guy, I can't remember his name, who wrote the foreword to this book, obviously it had been reported to him and he was reporting it in good faith as if it was true. So somebody was trying to say this message was connected with the Nine. Anyway.
Well, Well, this is we could talk for hours, but I want to let you
Okay.
go. But to wrap it up, what do you think? 25 years later, are there is the sort of general theme of the Stargate Conspiracy book? Do you think is it still apparent today? I mean, we see a lot, especially in the sort of UFO community, with did a lot of disinformation and things like this. I mean, what do you think has kind of persisted, to 2026?
I think I mean, just the reason we wrote the book was that we could see what was going on in the 90s, which we, haven't had time to touch on, but was building up to some event that was going to happen that would coincide with the millennium. So we wanted to sound a warning that if anything weird does happen at the millennium, don't just fall for it, don't accept it. And by getting that message out, it was actually extremely successful. We actually managed to get the event we were worried about cancelled. That's a whole other story. But the key thing for us is, there was a work by Jacques Vallée, the ufologist, Passport to Laconia in the 70s, in which he sounds this warning of the political potential, or what he calls the spiritual blackmail of sort of harnessing the kind of cult belief in extraterrestrials and UFOs, particularly the idea that they will come and save us from ourselves. And that belief is still very much around. You see it all the time. And in many ways, we can see it actually been building the last few years. This there's been various UFO conferences about preparation for contact. They're going to arrive at any moment, just as they were going to arrive in the 1970s and never did show up.
And it's also the same mentality really as the end times,
Yeah.
and the people who are so fervently, the end times are coming, the end times are coming. They don't seem to have any grasp on history, because there's so many points throughout history that where people have believed the end times are coming, that the 16th century or the first century for that matter, the world will stop at about 2 generations from now,
I mean, it's a powerful belief that pulls people along, and let's face it, for the last 2,000 years, that has kept people going. How many times has the apocalypse or the second coming or both, it's going to happen at the end of the first millennium at that time. It's an incredibly powerful thing, and now in our age, it's kind of getting transferred over from a religious context into a kind of a science, I was going to say science-y one, but a science fiction-y one, where instead of it being about gods, it's about extraterrestrials, but they who probably created us by genetic engineering or something like that. But this belief that they will come and sort out all our problems. We don't have to do it ourselves. It's an incredibly powerful message. If someone manages to, as Jacques Vallée said, if someone manages to grab that and harness it, it can be an incredibly powerful tool of political control, which is what we think the Nine was kind of experimenting towards.
I mean, I suppose the underlying message of our book is really is like the old X-Files, really, is trust no one. Question everything.
Yeah.
Question us. Question everything. Trust no one.
As it said on the back of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.